What if I told you that scientists finally reached the inside of Noah's Ark, and they did it without ever opening a door? No shovel, no dynamite, no crew climbing down into the dark. Just a machine dragging invisible waves through solid ground, 7 meters beneath a hillside in eastern Turkey, in the exact spot the Bible says the boat came to rest. And when the readings came back, the ground was not solid at all. There were tunnels, there were corridors. There was a chamber in the center of the formation that the research team quietly started calling the atrium. 3 levels, stacked on top of each other, in a mound shaped like a ship and pointed uphill. For almost 70 years, people argued about the outside of this thing, the shape, the length, the way it sits 515 feet long on a mountain with no sea. And for almost 70 years, every single argument had the same wall in front of it. Nobody could see inside. Human eyes can only read a surface, and a surface can always be a coincidence. But radar reads what eyes cannot, and in the last few years, a team armed with ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity, and satellite-grade soil chemistry did something no explorer in a century had managed to do. They looked through the ground, they mapped the interior, and what they found does not look like a hill. It confirmed some of the wild old claims. It demolished others, and then, at the very heart of the formation, it found something that nobody has physically entered yet, something sealed, something waiting. This is the part that should unsettle you, because the deeper the machines looked, the less this looked like an accident of geology, and the more it looked like a room built to hold something, a room that has been closed for a very long time. Before we get to what is inside, you need to understand why nobody could get inside for so long. And you need to understand how a boat-shaped scar of dirt on a Turkish mountainside became the most fought-over 3 acres in all of archaeology. The story begins in 1959 in the highlands of eastern Turkey in a photograph that should not have shown anything at all. A Turkish army captain named İlhan Durupınar was reviewing aerial reconnaissance images near the Tenderek Mountains, roughly 18 miles south of Mount Ararat. He was mapping terrain. He was looking for borders, ridgelines, ordinary military geography. What he found instead was a shape. A long, smooth oval, pointed sharp at one end and rounded at the other. Sitting alone at around 6,500 feet of elevation, it looked like the hull of a ship pressed into the earth. And it was sitting on a mountain, in a region with no river, no lake, and no coastline for hundreds of miles. The photo ran in Life magazine in 1960. Most of the world looked at it, shrugged, and moved on. But not everyone. In 1977, a man named Ron Wyatt walked into this story and never really walked back out. Wyatt was not an archaeologist. He was a nurse anesthetist from Tennessee, a man with a wife, 3 children, and a habit of spending every vacation in the Middle East chasing things the Bible mentioned. Some people called him a treasure hunter. Others called him a fraud. Ron did not seem to care. He had seen the photograph. He believed, and he traveled to a barren stretch of land near a village called Uzungili to walk the formation with his own feet. What he saw stopped him cold. From the ground, the shape was not just boat-like from the air. It had walls. It had raised embankments running down both sides. It had a pointed prow rising out of the dirt. So Wyatt did the simplest thing a person can do. He pulled out a tape measure and walked the length of it, end to end, 515 feet. For most people, that number means nothing. For Ron Wyatt, it meant everything. Because the book of Genesis does not describe the ark in vague poetry. It gives a blueprint. Chapter 6, verse 15. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. And when you take the ancient Egyptian royal cubit, the unit a man like Noah would have known, and you multiply it out, 300 cubits lands almost exactly on 515 feet. Not close. Almost exact. Coincidence? Maybe. But Wyatt did not believe in coincidences. He believed he was standing on the deck of the most famous ship in human history. And the world responded exactly the way you would expect. They laughed, they dismissed him, they called him an amateur with a tape measure and a Bible and an overactive imagination. And for a while they were winning that argument, because Wyatt could point at the outside all he wanted. He could not show anyone the inside. The shape was suggestive, The shape was not proof. The local people had another detail, though, one that is easy to miss. For generations, long before any photograph, long before any American showed up with equipment, the villagers had a name for this place. They called it the place of the ship. Not the hill, not the ridge. The ship. As if everyone who had ever lived within sight of it already knew what it was. And almost 50 years after Wyatt first measured it, a new team, carrying technology Wyatt could only have dreamed of, would finally do the thing he never could. They would look underneath, and the readings came back stranger than anyone expected. The first thing the new researchers did was something Ron Wyatt never had the tools to attempt. They did not dig, they did not drill. They tested the ground itself. The project is run by a group called Noah's Ark Scans, working alongside Turkish universities, and directed on the archaeology side by Professor Senker Atilla of Sivas Cumhuriyet University. One of the people on that team is a soil scientist named William Crabtree. And soil science is not glamorous, but it is exactly the kind of quiet, unglamorous evidence that is very hard to fake. Here is the idea. If this formation is just a hill, a natural fold of rock and clay, then the dirt inside the boat shape should be more or less identical to the dirt in the field around it. Same chemistry, same organic content, same everything, because it all came from the same place. But if something large and organic had once been buried here, something made of wood, something that decayed over thousands of years, it would leave a chemical shadow. Rotting timber does not vanish. It changes the soil. It floods it with organic carbon. It shifts the potassium. It alters the acidity. It leaves a fingerprint that lingers for millennia after the wood itself is gone. So the team collected samples, dozens of them, from points inside the formation and points in the surrounding land, and they sent them to a laboratory, and the results did not match. The organic matter inside the boat shape came back roughly 3 times higher than the soil outside it. The potassium ran about 38% higher. The pH was different. The chemistry inside the formation was not the chemistry of the mountain around it. It was the chemistry of a place where something organic had rotted into the earth and never fully left. And there was one more thing. Something you can see with your own eyes if you stand there at the right time of year. The plants that grow over the formation grow a different color. Duller. More yellow in the autumn than the grass in the field beside them. Vegetation does that when the ground beneath it is different, when the substrate under the roots is not ordinary soil. Now, the honest scientist has to say the careful thing here. Elevated organic content does not prove a boat. Soil chemistry can be strange for many reasons. This alone is not a smoking gun. But it is a strange result, and it pointed the same direction every other clue was about to point. The team had asked the ground a simple question. Is there something in here that was once alive? And the ground had answered yes. That alone would be enough to justify another expedition. But the soil was only the surface, because next, the team stopped asking what was here and started asking a far more dangerous question. When? To understand why the next finding matters, you have to understand what is at stake in a single number. If this formation is Noah's Ark, then it is not just old. It is old in a very specific way. It has to line up with the flood. And the flood, in the traditional biblical timeline, sits somewhere in the window of 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. Not older, not newer. If the material at this site dated to 50,000 years ago, the story collapses. If it dated to last century, the story collapses. The number has to land inside a narrow door. So a research team gathered samples, around 30 pieces of rock and soil pulled from the formation, and sent them to the laboratories at Istanbul Technical University, one of the most respected technical institutions in the country. This was not a lone believer with a metal detector. This was a coordinated effort involving Istanbul Technical University, Auri Ibrahim Çetin University, and Andrews University in the United States, studying this structure since 2021. The lab looked at the material, and the results were extraordinary. First, the composition. The samples contained clay-like material. They contained marine deposits, and they contained the remnants of mollusks, sea creatures, shellfish, the residue of the ocean, embedded in a mound sitting 6,500 feet up a mountain in a landlocked corner of eastern Turkey, hundreds of miles from any sea. Sit with that for a moment. Marine sediment, seashells, ocean animals, on a mountain where no ocean has any business being. And then came the date. The samples returned an age of roughly 3,000 to 5,000 years, the Chalcolithic period, the exact window. Not too old, not too young. Landing inside the narrow door the story requires. Professor Farooq Kaya, the vice-rector of Ari Ibrahim Chechen University, put it carefully, the way a scientist has to. He said that according to the initial results, there appears to have been human activity in this region going back to the Chalcolithic period. He did not say ark. He is a careful man, and careful men do not say ark on the record, but listen to what the evidence is actually stacking up. A boat-shaped formation, 515 feet long, matching a 3,000-year-old blueprint to the foot, soil chemistry consistent with buried, decayed wood, marine sediment and mollusk shells sitting thousands of feet above the sea, and a date that lands precisely in the window of a great flood. Any one of these, on its own, you could wave away. Coincidence, contamination, wishful thinking. But they are not on their own anymore. They are pointing at the same spot from 4 different directions. And the spot they are pointing at is a story most of the modern world was taught to treat as a fairy tale. And the surveys were not done. Because there was one more property of this formation that folklore had whispered about for generations, and that nobody had been able to measure until recently. Not its shape, not its chemistry, its magnetism. There is an old story among the people who live near the formation. A small, strange piece of local folklore that sounds like nothing until you take it seriously. They say your compass acts wrong near the boat. For a long time, that was just a story. The kind of thing you hear in a village and smile at and forget. Until, in 2014, a geophysical survey team decided to stop smiling and actually measure it. And what they found was not nothing. Beneath the formation, the instruments picked up a magnetic signature. And it was not a random scatter of iron the way you would expect from ordinary volcanic rock, which is full of magnetic minerals distributed with no pattern at all. This signature had a pattern. It was symmetrical. It ran along the structure in a way that the surveyors described as consistent with a metallic, reinforced hull, a regular, organized magnetic field, arranged along the length of the boat shape, as if something structural, something built with a repeating design, was buried in the ground and pulling on the machines above it. Now here is where the skeptic leans in, and the skeptic has a real point, so we are going to give it to them honestly. Basalt is magnetic. Eastern Turkey is volcanic country. Iron-rich rock can absolutely produce magnetic readings, and the ground here is full of it. A magnetic anomaly, by itself, is not a ship. But the word that keeps causing trouble is not magnetic. The word is symmetrical. Nature scatters. Nature distributes iron randomly through a rock. It does not usually line it up into a regular, repeating boat-length pattern with a structure that mirrors itself down a central axis. Symmetry is the fingerprint of intention. Symmetry is what tools leave behind. And remember what else has already come back from this same patch of ground. The dimensions of a ship, the chemistry of buried wood, the shells of a vanished sea, and now a magnetic field shaped like a hull. The question was quietly shifting. For decades, the argument had been, is this formation a boat or is it a hill? But the readings were starting to make that the wrong question. The evidence was no longer really asking whether something was here. It was starting to ask how it got here, and what it was made of, and what was still locked inside it. And that is exactly where the team pointed the machines next. Not at the outside anymore. Not the shape, not the soil, not the field around it. They aimed the radar straight down, into the body of the formation, to answer the one question 70 years of arguing had never been able to touch. What does it look like on the inside? This is the part the whole story has been building toward. This is the part that justifies every claim in the title. Because for the first time, someone got inside. Not with a shovel, with ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and LiDAR. These are the tools engineers use to map what is under a road before they tear it up, to find voids under a building, to see the shape of a thing without touching it. The team, led on the technical side by Andrew Jones and with geophysical radar work run by Dr. Khosrow Bakhtar, dragged these instruments across the formation and sent their signals down into the ground. And then they read what bounced back. Solid rock returns a certain kind of echo, messy, chaotic, random. That is what a natural hill is supposed to look like from the inside. Noise, the signature of geology doing what geology does. That is not what came back. What came back had lines, straight ones. The scans revealed right angles and linear structures, roughly 7 meters below the surface. Angular patterns, geometric regularity. The kind of edges that erosion does not make, that water does not carve, that a random fold of rock has no reason to produce. Straight lines, meeting at corners, buried 7 meters down inside a mountain. And it got stranger. The radar traced a tunnel running roughly 13 meters through the center of the formation, a passage, corridors crossing the body of the vessel, a central spine with lateral branches coming off it, and the whole structure resolved into 3 distinct layers, stacked vertically, one on top of another. 3 layers, 3 decks. Now open the book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 16, where God gives Noah the internal plan of the ark, lower, second, and third decks, 3 levels. The oldest surviving description of the inside of this boat, written down thousands of years ago, describes exactly the 3-layer structure the radar found buried in the ground. And then there was the chamber. Near the heart of the formation, the scans found an open interior space, a void with defined edges, and the team gave it a name. They called it the atrium, a room. An empty, enclosed space, deliberate enough in its shape that hardened geophysicists started referring to it not as an anomaly, but as a room. Stop and think about what a room means here. A natural rock formation is solid. It is filled. A syncline, a fold of sedimentary rock, does not have hollow chambers with straight walls 7 meters down. But a boat does. A boat is defined by being hollow. A boat is a shell built around empty, useful space. And the radar was telling the team that this formation, this supposed accident of geology, was not solid on the inside. It was structured. It had corridors and levels and at least one open chamber, arranged with a regularity that nature does not casually produce. They had reached the interior. And here is the detail that should raise the hair on your arms. Nobody has physically gone in. Everything the team knows about that central chamber, they know from waves and echoes and readings on a screen. The atrium is still sealed, still buried, still closed, exactly as it has been for as long as anyone can measure. The machines found the door. No one has opened it. That alone would be the biggest discovery in the history of biblical archaeology. But it still was not the strangest part of this story. Because it turns out, the team with the radar was not the first to describe the inside of this thing. Other people had described the interior of Noah's Ark before, long before radar existed. And what they said they saw is where this story stops being fascinating and starts being frightening. Here is what almost every modern article leaves out. The radar team, for all their technology, were latecomers. Because for over 100 years, people have been climbing off that mountain, claiming they had already been inside the Ark, and their descriptions match what the machines just found. Go back to around the year 1900. An Armenian boy named George Hagopian said his uncle took him up Mount Ararat during a severe drought when the ice had pulled back further than usual, and he said his uncle lifted him up onto the roof of an enormous boat. Hagopian described walking on it. He described the wood, which he said was so hard, so petrified, so much like stone, that he could not cut it with a knife. He was a child. He had no reason to invent the specific detail that the wood had turned to rock, but that is exactly what wood does over thousands of years under the right conditions. It fossilizes. It turns to stone. It becomes the kind of thing that leaves a chemical shadow in the soil and a magnetic ghost in the ground. Now come forward to 1943, the middle of the Second World War. A United States Army sergeant named Ed Davis, stationed in the region, said local men he had befriended led him up the mountain and showed him the structure. And Davis did not just say he saw a boat from a distance. He described looking into it. He described different levels. He described structural beams. He said he could see 2 decks through an opening in the side. And he described compartments, cages, rooms that looked built to hold animals. Read that again with the radar in mind. In 1943, a soldier with no equipment and no agenda described 2 decks and internal compartments. 80 years later, machines that can see through solid ground reported 3 stacked layers, corridors, and a central chamber. The illiterate folklore and the electrical resistivity survey are describing the same interior, and Davis and Hagopian are not alone. In 1959, a United States Air Force pilot named Gregor Schwinghammer said he saw a large, rectangular, barge-like structure sitting in a horseshoe-shaped depression on the mountain from the air. There is even a Russian expedition from 1916 that supposedly photographed the Ark, whose images conveniently vanished in the revolution that followed. And then there is the strangest chapter of all, the one that drags governments into it, because it turns out the most powerful intelligence agency on Earth has been quietly photographing something on that mountain for decades. It is called the Ararat Anomaly. High up near the summit, around 15,500 feet, on the northwest plateau, there is an object frozen into the ice. The United States military first captured it on film in 1949, and then those photographs were classified, locked away, kept from the public for over 40 years. It took a University of Richmond professor named Porcher Taylor filing under the Freedom of Information Act to finally pry the 1,949 images loose in 1995. And in between, the anomaly kept getting photographed by classified spy satellites in 1973, 1976, 1989. A boat-shaped object under the ice near the peak of Mount Ararat that the government photographed again and again for half a century and did not want you to see. Then, in 2010, a Hong Kong-based team called Noah's Ark Ministries International said they went inside. High on Ararat, at around 14,700 feet, they filmed what they said were wooden compartments, beams, rooms that looked built to house animals. They carbon dated the wood to roughly 4,800 years old, and one of them told a camera they were 99.9% certain this was it. But this is where you have to slow down and be honest, because this thread has a knife in it. The 2010 claim fell apart under scrutiny. A veteran Ark researcher named Randall Price suggested the whole thing may have been staged, that Kurdish workers may have hauled old wood up the mountain to fool the expedition. Scientists were blunter. One Cornell archaeologist called it a crock and pointed out there is not enough water on the planet to float a boat that high up a mountain. And that tension, that exact tension, is the whole story of Noah's Ark. Real, careful, published data on one side, fraud, wishful thinking, and staged wood on the other. The two are tangled together so tightly that after 100 years, nobody has been able to fully separate them. But underneath all of it, one thing refuses to go away. Independent people, across 100 years, with no way to coordinate, keep describing the same interior: decks, compartments, cages, petrified wood. And now the machines are describing it too, which forces the question this whole video has been circling. If there really is a hollow, 3-decked, compartmented structure buried in that mountain, the frightening part is not that it exists. The frightening part is what it means. Here is where the story stops being a treasure hunt and starts being something that should genuinely unsettle you. For most of your life, the flood was a bedtime story. A nice one. Animals, 2x2, a rainbow, a children's book, soft edges. The version we tell kids precisely because the real version is too big to hand a child. But strip away the picture book and look at what the evidence at this site is actually describing. Not a story. An event. A boat the length of 1.5 football fields, built by people who, according to the mainstream timeline, were supposed to be simple Chalcolithic farmers with no shipyards, no timber industry, and no trade networks capable of an engineering project on that scale. And yet the soil says wood rotted here. The lab says the sea was here. The dating says it happened in a narrow window 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. And the radar says there are decks and corridors and a sealed room buried 7 meters down. That is not a comforting picture. That is the picture of a real catastrophe. A civilization-ending flood, engineered against by someone who saw it coming, whose vessel was so massive it had to be built to hold what could not be replaced. And here is the detail that turns unease into something colder. This story is not just in the Bible. The Babylonians wrote it down before the Hebrews did in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where a man named Utnapishtim survives a world-drowning flood in a great boat and releases a bird to find land. In India, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu, warned to build a ship to survive a deluge that wipes out mankind. Ancient China has its great flood, and the hero Yu, the Greeks tell it as Deucalion. The Maya, the Aztecs, and the Irish all tell it too. Culture after culture, on continent after continent, separated by oceans they could not cross and languages they did not share, all telling the same story, a flood that ended the world. A handful of survivors, a boat, a mountain, a bird sent out to find dry land. Sound familiar? It should. It is the same story, told by people who had no way to copy it from each other. There are two ways to read that, and both of them are heavy. Maybe it is a story so primal that every human culture invented its own version. Or maybe, and this is the reading that makes researchers go quiet, they are not separate stories at all. Maybe they are separate memories. Fragments of one real event, so enormous it burned itself into every people who survived it, and got carried down through thousands of years in a dozen different languages, until it reached us as myth. That is the scary part. Not that a boat might be buried in a mountain, but that the flood might have been real. That the thing we filed under fairy tale might be a scar. And that the reason every ancient culture remembers the same drowning of the world is that the world really did drown, and these are the voices of the people who made it out. And at the center of that possibility sits a sealed chamber, 7 meters underground, that the radar found and no human has entered. The atrium, still closed, still waiting, full of we do not know what. But before you let yourself believe all of it, you need to hear the other side. Because the case against this being the Ark is not weak, and any honest look at this mystery has to stare straight at it. Here is the strongest version of the Skeptics Case, and it deserves to be heard in full. The mainstream geological explanation for the Durupınar formation is that it is a syncline, a doubly plunging syncline, to be exact. That is a natural fold in layered sedimentary rock, where the layers dip down from both ends toward the middle, and erosion carves the softer material away and leaves a raised, streamlined, boat-shaped mound behind. It happens. It is real geology. And it can absolutely produce a shape that looks, from the air, uncannily like a ship. In 1996, a geologist named Lawrence Collins co-authored a paper with a title that pulls no punches: Bogus Noah's Ark, from Turkey Exposed as a Common Geologic Structure. The paper argued that the formation is natural concentrations of iron minerals, limonite, and magnetite in the steeply inclined layers of that syncline, which notice would also explain the magnetic readings. And here is the part believers do not like to mention. Collins co-wrote that paper with David Fasold, one of the very men who had originally championed the site, and Andrew Snelling, who is himself a young Earth creationist, a man who wants the Ark to be real, also examined it and concluded it is a natural formation. The famous anchor stones, the drogue stones Wyatt pointed to, were analyzed and found to be local andesite and volcanic rock, not stone carried from ancient Mesopotamia. And the man who did more than anyone to promote this site, David Fasold, eventually testified under oath in 1997 that the claim was, in his own words, absolute BS. That is the case against. It is serious. It is made by real scientists, and some of it is made by people who wanted the opposite answer. So maybe that is all this is. Maybe the shape is a syncline. Maybe the magnetic anomaly is basalt, the marine deposits are ordinary sediment, the carbon dates are random plant decay, the eyewitnesses saw what they wanted to see, and every flood myth on Earth is just human beings independently afraid of water. Maybe. But then you have to explain why the scientists keep going back. You have to explain the 3 stacked layers and the 13-meter tunnel and the sealed chamber that a syncline has no business containing. You have to explain the soil chemistry that matches decayed wood, and the marine shells 6,000 feet up a mountain, and a boy in 1900, and a soldier in 1943, and a radar team in 2024, all describing the same interior. You have to explain why the most powerful government on Earth classified its photographs of that summit for 40 years, and you have to explain the name, the one the villagers gave this place long before the radar, the place of the ship. History has a habit of humbling us. Troy was a myth until a man dug it up. The Hittites were a biblical exaggeration until we found their empire. Göbekli Tepe pushed the story of civilization back 6,000 years and rewrote what we thought ancient people could build. The muon scans found a hidden void inside the Great Pyramid that nobody expected. Again and again, the thing we were certain was nothing turned out to be something we simply did not have the tools to see yet. So maybe the Durupınar formation is a syncline, a hill that happens, against staggering odds, to be shaped like a boat, filled with wood chemistry, wrapped in a hull-shaped magnetic field, hollowed into 3 decks, and named after a ship by people who never saw the inside. Or maybe we finally built the tools to see what has been sitting there the whole time. And maybe the reason it frightens people is not that it might be fake, it is that it might be real. Because despite the ridicule, despite the geology papers, despite 100 years of mockery, that formation is still there, still 515 feet long, still pointed uphill, still hollow, still sealed, still sitting in the exact place where every flood story on every continent says the boat finally came to rest. And the scientists keep going back. There is already a plan to send a robotic probe into those tunnels, to finally open the atrium, to physically enter the interior that the radar only mapped. Which means the last question is not whether they reached the inside, they did. The last question is what happens when someone finally steps through that sealed door. And once you know it is there, closed, waiting, 7 meters under a mountain, you cannot unsee it. The hill changes. The story changes. So I want to know where you land. Drop a number in the comments. 1. It is a syncline, and we are all seeing faces in the clouds. 2. Something organic is buried there, but we cannot call it the Ark yet. 3. The interior scans are real, and this changes everything. Or 4. The atrium is still sealed, and the answer is behind a door nobody has opened. And if there is another site you want fed through this kind of analysis next, the Ararat Anomaly at the summit, the classified satellite images, the wood at 14,000 feet, tell me below. Because if there is a hollow, 3-decked chamber sealed inside a hill at the bottom of the mountain, imagine what is still frozen in the ice at the top.